Hi and welcome. My name is Sophie. I'm the community manager here at the Information Lab, and the recording you're about to watch is my interview with author Carl Allchin about his new book, Communicating with Data. I was meant to interview Carl earlier on this month, but unfortunately, due to illness, we had to postpone our interview. And the only time we could both both get together was quite early in the morning UK time. So not a good time to run a live interview and Q&A. So we pre-recorded this. If you would like to ask Carl any questions, and please do, he would love to hear your thoughts, comments, and questions about his new book, Communicating with Data. You can find him on social. I'll drop his social connections on Twitter and LinkedIn into the comments below this video, and you'll also see his Twitter handle pop up on screen in just a moment when this interview recording starts. And if you would like to go out and get a copy of his book, it is currently for sale in all good book retailers. So please do go out and buy a copy of his book. Thank you so much. And I really hope you enjoy my interview with author Carl Allchin. Hi and welcome everyone. I am joined today with Carl Allchin, author of brand new book, Communicating with Data. Now, you may know Carl from his previous book, Tableau Prep Up and Running, and you can also see behind Carl on the wall behind him, the front cover of that book. So we're hoping he'll soon have another front cover to stick above it when they send him the framed version of that. Carl is my colleague and also a Tableau Zen master, and the person who conceived the idea of the Wednesday Community Tableau Challenge Prep and Data, which he's now joined with some other people to keep running. So you've probably seen Carl in the community or have heard about him before, or hopefully own and have read his first book. And we're here today to talk a little bit about his second book, what it's about, Communicating with Data, why he wrote it, and what was the inspiration behind it. So Carl, it's really fantastic to have you here today.
Thank you, Sophie. Thank you for inviting me.
So I gave you a bit of a rambling introduction there, but can you tell us a little bit more about yourself if people haven't met you before?
Yeah, where to start? I always find this bit a bit weird. How far do I go back? I think the first weird thing is I'm a history and politics student. Teaching at the data school is always really interesting because we have this moment of computer science grads assuming that I've done this kind of STEM degree of some kind. It's like, no, it's history and politics. It's analytical. That's where this thing started. But really kind of my world of data started when I first started working, and that was with Aviva, so a really big insurer. And it was seeing how everyone was using information and data to kind of do their jobs, but not really wanting to get involved with it because it was either scary or it seemed somebody else's specialist role that they would have to do. So that's kind of really where I got started, and that rolled into running a pretty sizable data team. And then that became working at Barclays. Then that's where I got started with Tableau. We got to use Tableau for kind of any data benefit we could find across the bank, which was an awesome role, and that was really good fun. That was where the data nickname or Data Ninja nickname comes from, is that as we kind of like just came up from nowhere, would do and deliver something and then just duck away again once we trained the team to look after it rather than trying to manage it all.
I did not know that. And for people who don't know, Carl mentioned Data Ninja there because on Twitter, you can be found at the handle at Data Ninja.
Data Jedi Ninja.
Data Jedi Ninja, that's it.
It's because there were lots of data ninjas around at the time. It was kind of like the fun community phrase. So I kind of wanted to go one step further and see if my skills could keep up with it. Sadly, they couldn't at the time. I've improved over the years, but yeah, I thought, what's one level up from a data ninja, a data Jedi ninja? So that was a joke that kind of stuck and stuck quite well. So that's now the handle that I can't really change.
That's it. It's a good handle. Definitely. I remember before I met you in person, I knew people by their community names or their Twitter handles, and yeah, so I never actually knew where that came from, but I've known you to be Jedi Ninja with your little avatar of a ninja man.
We managed to buy those. We each got so there's myself, Peter Jilks, and Lee Mooney. We each bought ourselves a little icon to use. So we found an artist who basically created these little icons for sale. So we each picked up a ninja with a different weapon. So I think I've got a throwing star. Lee had a big sword. Pete had nunchucks. So it's just kind of, we went all in. And we actually got Barclays to change our job titles to Data Ninja, which within a kind of corporate setting is quite tough to do. We got a lot of raised eyebrows, I think it was fair to say. But yeah, we had a lot of fun using Tableau to really go and explore and just empower people with data, which has always been kind of my thing of, rather than kind of putting somebody through a very formal IT driven system as kind of mass reporting has to be, to really let people find out how to do it themselves and go from there. And some of the team that we worked with to help us out was the information lab. And that's kind of really where my career went post Barclays, was coming and joining the information lab as a consultant, first of all, for 4 years. And then the last 3 years has been as the other head coach, so working alongside Andy Kriebel to teach this next generation of great analysts and data workers to go out there and help other people learn, and rather than just trying to do it all myself, which is sometimes what I try to do too much.
That's I'm forever glad you did join the information lab and became the other head coach of the data school, because I think it's amazing to have you and Andy teaching the next generation of data users, not just Tableau users, but people who are very illiterate and across data. So there's a lot, you've done a lot in your career, and it hasn't been a standard, well, there's no standard career in data, but it hasn't been what people may think, which is you study a STEM or a type subject at university, you then worked in an analytical role, and that's it. You've done a lot of different things, and obviously had quite a bit of fun with some of the expectations of what working in data is along the way. It also sounds like, especially coming from a arts background and doing things, both working with clients and now teaching other people how to use data themselves, you have had a lot of experience communicating with data to different audiences and for different end goals, maybe to communicate the outcomes of report or analysis, but also to help other people understand how to do things with data. So this wealth of knowledge you've built up in communicating with data, did that influence what pushed you to write your current novel, Communicating with Data? Or was it something very different?
Yeah, it does all stem from that. And I think the battle that I felt very early on with seeing the reports flying around at Viva, and my first role for a few months was basically helping to collate the reports and the commentary and the feedback for the executive, and to kind of summarize a lot of this information that was already summarized was really tough, because it was always a battle to kind of go and do this easily, that nobody really felt that they could ask the questions that they wanted to do. It was all very static. It was all, am I asking the right questions about the right things? And I think I've always had that battle in the back of my head ever since. And how do we go and empower either the analysts to have an easier role to get those answers out better, or how do we help people go and ask those questions themselves, rather than having to rely on a theoretical specialist to do this for them, where it doesn't feel like we do that with words or numbers. So why do we kind of expect the same to happen just because it's data instead of words or numbers or spoken words or written words? And I think it's that kind of push for, what do I need to do to go and help people get over that barrier has always been my push. And that's gone through official training schemes all the way through to trying to do things, as you mentioned earlier, with prep and data, that not only should we empower people to do the analysis of a data set, but also have the empowerment to go and build and refine that data set for themselves to make that analysis easier in the first place. And those skills weren't there. So that's always been almost like a little running raison d'etre in the background of how do we go and support people to do this. And so when I was thinking about this subject, and if I'm being honest, just having a child that's now 11 weeks old, but when we were thinking about having a kid, it's that moment, as you might know, reflecting back on where you've got to in your life so far and the impact that you've made. And I kind of sat there and thought, 15 years of a career, where how much difference have I actually made? Hopefully some, to some people, but the overall subject itself is still stuck in some regards, that people don't feel empowered by this stuff. They don't feel comfortable with this. And as I kind of started to think about the subject more, it did feel like the book that I wanted to write was not just around data visualization. And there's nothing wrong with writing on that subject. There's some amazing, amazing books out there. But I wanted to kind of do a step either side of that. First of all, what is data? But then the other side of that, which is how do you then go and use those solutions in an organization? So kind of leaning on some of that experience. One, as cathartic reconciliation for myself of just trying to think about what hasn't gone well on the operational side. But then also just trying to go back and remember what it was like when I first started to work with data of this mystery of what the hell is this thing called a string or a Boolean field, and what's really the difference? What does it make? And what does one allow me to do over the other? Or what happens when I have to go and start to kind of pull different data sources together? And that was a big mystery that I've always been happy to go, I don't know, show me, let me get stuck in, where not everybody has that luxury of time or that kind of attitude towards it. And that kind of means we get stuck. So that was kind of where I really wanted to start with the book of how could I go and kind of pull those years of experience together at the same time of go and kind of fix this issue that I haven't fixed so far in my career. And I don't expect this one book will do it, but I'd really love it to kind of fill some of those gaps in the way.
That's no, that's really interesting. And a few things you mentioned there, which was sort of the two sides, which is where data comes from, the very start of working with a data set to the sort of the finished visualization product. When people hear about the title of your book, Communicating with Data, they may immediately think data literacy. How do people become more literate and able to communicate with data? I need to find a better word for that instead of explaining the title of the book with its own title. And one thing I think is quite different about your book is you spend quite a bit of time talking about where, as you mentioned, where data comes from, and why that is so important for people to understand. Can you just tell me a little bit more about why you think it is so important for people to understand where data comes from? Because I don't think I've read about that in any other book in such detail.
It's, for me, some of it went back to a conversation that I was having with Sarah Nell, who works for Tableau, and also Alan Hillary. We kind of rolled that conversation together as they were looking more at data literacy. And it was from Sarah reading the chapter on data in my book that she was kind of asking why we haven't done more of this. Why do we not talk about this origin? But for me, I think this was where I go back to the degree that I took, which was history and politics of you don't cite words without understanding the source. And you will always have the traditional view on something, the revisionist, and then the neo-revisionist view. It's just how everything works in history of just that's how views go and develop, and people take that initial finding and then go and build on it further. So you've got to understand their position, where their sources come from. And I feel like we've lost a bit of that in the data world. I don't think completely, and people do cite sources, don't get me wrong, but it's understanding why those sources have been used and having that critical thought around it, that if you can kind of go and understand where it's come from, you can also start to understand why it was collected. And this is kind of the other piece that hopefully I kind of pick up within that chapter a little bit, which is most data comes back to human behavior, or is human-centric in some ways. We care about the weather. It's not human-generated. Climate change in tangent, I'm narrowly avoiding here. But it's the effects on humans that we care about, and that's why we measure it. Or actually me getting out of bed in the morning and turning on the shower kicks off a whole load of data collection around water usage, electricity usage, etc., heating if I've got a smart thermostat, etc. And all of that kind of human behavior piece is why are we collecting it? What is it really trying to tell us? What are we therefore not collecting as well? Is almost as important as what we're collecting. And it was trying to have these thoughts, trying to share these thoughts, but also not go too deep, because the challenge for this kind of introductory book that, one of the reasons why I pitched it where I did was I found a stat in a report by Tableau that talked about, I think it was from Accenture, and Accenture survey that had been done, that 79% of people don't feel comfortable in their jobs using data to do what they need to do. So if we're still sitting here, 15 years into my career of doing this stuff with the growth of data, and 4 out of 5 people still don't feel comfortable, we've really got to go and step back. So let's step back, but at the same time, let's build those kind of fundamental thoughts of think about the source, just as we would do with any other piece of information in life. Let's also think about the human-centric behavior for the good of, put the human at the heart of the data point, but also at the same time think about what we're missing because of that. That's kind of really where I wanted to start, because then if you then learn how to communicate that point clearly to others and thinking about your audience, etc., that's a really strong basis to kind of go and build off. And I feel like we've just stepped away from that we'll go and pick up a data source that's ready, that's clean, that's ready and able to go, and we'll use it because that's the data that we have available, rather than actually saying, well, what data should we have available? Let's go and think about all of those different things that are out there to produce the most informed opinion possible. Again, trying to keep that simple, but have that thought in people's heads that, you don't produce one thing and you're done. It's this iterative learning that we go through. Data is no different from words. It's no different kind of from any of the education that we've had. So let's go through, and as we learn things, we can go and build those arguments further, but we've got to understand the fundamentals of where this stuff comes from.
I love that idea and explanation that data itself, any piece of data has a backstory, and to really be able to work and understand it, you need to know what that backstory is. I think that makes a lot of sense, and we know that, you're exactly right. We know the how and whys about so many other things we do in life. Why don't we know this about data in itself? That makes a lot of sense. And that sort of dovetails into the other thing I think your book does does a lot more than I've seen in other data literacy books, which is communicating with data isn't just talking about it, isn't just sort of saying, here's a chart behind me, and then telling somebody about that chart. It's also starts, again, that idea of backstory starts much earlier than that, about the decisions you make about design of that chart, annotations, titles and things like that. Can you tell me a little bit about why you've covered visual ways to work and improve charts in your book as forms of communication, and not just how do you tell people about data?
Yeah, because that was really interesting, because I learned from lots of the really great books that are out there, all the way from, the normal Tuft books, Alberto Cairo's, etc., Stephen Few's, and those guys are better than I am at that stuff. They've researched for much longer, had longer careers, thought about this stuff way more than I had, as they were well ahead of me on this kind of thing. Even Cole with storytelling with data, the way that she was focused on that storytelling, I didn't want to rehash something that was there already. So I kind of stood back, and it's how do I think about charts and that visual communication? And I kind of sat there and thought about the different elements for me, which starts from the marks that you make on the page and that choice of mark. But very quickly it became about the other stuff around it, sets that context, helps to give that audience that backstory that we've just spoken about, not in a complicated way, in an easier way as possible, of what lines can you add onto a page to that mark to go and tell me something different? What titles and subtitles and stand first do I use around those charts to go and tell me a little bit more about what's going on? And then it's that, zoom out even further, it's how do those charts then fit together, whether it's on a dashboard, a story, a newspaper article, kind of almost comic strip, however you want to use them to go and form that overall story. And I kind of haven't seen anybody write about it in that way. So I just thought that was a different way and a different approach to talk about this. And it kind of reflects on how my brain works when I look at somebody else's piece of work. That just like anybody else, I'll go and focus on the actual visual numbers that are being shown on the page, but then kind of you start to read the axes, you start to zoom out that little bit more in your view. And as you take in more, you start thinking about the different messages that's sharing. So that's what I've tried to reflect in the book, that after we talk about the basics of communication and data, most of the body of the book kind of sits on this idea of let's go and zoom into the actual mark type and then zoom out from there and see what that tells us as we roll through that, which I just thought was a fun and different way to do it. And it's kind of how I've started teaching a little bit more. And I've had a good reception to that it's very easy to miss some of these elements if you don't think about them in turn, because it's very easy to move on to that next chart instead. So yeah, I suppose that was a kind of a different factor in how I approach this.
No, I found it very helpful, and I like how then you've also said things that you've learned while writing this book, or have had to think about more, is now influencing how you're teaching data to data scholars in your current day job, which I think is fantastic. A book shouldn't just be something in isolation. It should come from somewhere, but also then help inform people and change what they do going forward. And so it's fantastic to see, as you as the author, it's changed how you think and teach and communicate with data going forward.
I'll just quickly say about that, like the process of writing a book, I found this with Prep Up and Running, even though it was very focused on one tool. I thought so much more about the process of preparing data, and that's why the first chapters of that is actually more theoretical about data preparation as a whole, of why do we not plan the preparation that we do in the same way that we might sketch out a dashboard layout to begin with and think about the questions that we're answering. Hang on a second, why aren't we thinking about the questions we're trying to answer when we prepare data? Like, for some of you, that may be completely normal, and if you've worked with data for years, it probably is. But again, lots of the people that I interact with and who I'm really targeting with this to build those fundamental skills, you probably haven't thought that it's well worth sitting down for 5 or 10 minutes before you start working on these things to go and plan this out. So I've actually, I think I've learned more about the subject from writing the books than maybe the people reading it have. I don't know. We'll find out in the reviews as we go through. But I found that iterative process that you're talking about of teaching tells me what I need to write, writing it then shows me actually what I need to teach. And that iterative loop is obviously really similar to naturally working with data and posing a question, finding an answer to it. That teaches me something. It makes me ask another question. So I like those little cycles in life. They entertain me quite a lot with, where is this thing actually going to go? I don't know. Let's get started and find out. And that's definitely been the case with both of these.
Well, that kind of leads me onto another question, which is, what's next for you? I know you've got you mentioned you've got an 11-week-old, a very small child. So what's next
Crying
for
in
you?
the background if you can hear, but I think the AirPods are quite good at taking the noise out these days.
See, what's next for you is it's probably just, continue being a father. But is there anything, are you beginning to think about anything else that you might be interested in doing, especially if it's this iterative process of you seeing, what do you see when you teach? What do then, as you said, it's a loop.
I thought you might ask this question. So I started to think about this. So thank you for actually asking this. It's an interesting one. So if I'm thinking about kind of what I've covered off of how to prepare data to then move into how do you actually communicate it, I think there's an overarching umbrella that I haven't spent enough time on, and I maybe don't see enough time spent on this in the community by the way that we share things through Twitter, through blog posts, through forums, which is how do we actually get to the questions that we're asking, and actually what are some of these analytical methods that we can actually start with in the first place. I saw a slide by Ben Jones in his talk for the Tableau conference, I think it was last year, where it was basically a Venn diagram piecing together what is data literacy, and it kind of made me think about what makes a good data piece of work. And lots of it comes down to stakeholder awareness, not just their own knowledge of the subject, but what is possible with data. And I feel like if we get, it's not just about data literacy or fluency, that is a big part of it, that if people can pick up those skills. But if you've got that ability to go and form that question and know what questions are possible, you will probably ask more questions about that. So I think there's a project kicking around in the back of my head that is absolutely Oscar dependent as to whether he starts sleeping at nights a little bit more, that will kind of give me that time to do that. But to go and start kind of digging into analytics and actually what are some of those common things that we do every day with data, let's go and explain what's actually going on within them, why we ask those questions, and then kind of what some of those charts mean that we then produce off the back of it. So hopefully then people feel more secure and comfortable with the subject, that they can then ask better questions and answer better questions. What that looks and feels like, I haven't worked out yet. Whoever wants to get involved in that, let me know. It's just literally kind of kicking around in my head over the last couple of weeks. But it definitely feels like there's something there that again, will hopefully help the overall communication with data one way or the other, whether it's about the visual, whether it's about the questions that we're trying to answer in life, with whatever organization we're working for, to go and kind of push us that a little bit further if we know what some of those ways of asking those questions and answering those questions are. Let's go through those, let's deal with those quickly, and then we can get to those kind of harder questions that we find off the back of that. So that's probably what's next, along with keeping prep and data going, which after we're up to now about 100 and 130, 140 challenges, which is nuts. Kudos to the Makeover Monday team for doing 300 challenges. But we're nearly halfway there, so we're catching you up slowly. We want to keep that going. We want to open that up. We genuinely love Jenny Martin and Tom Prowse, who currently help me out with prep and data. So if you've got challenges, let us know. We'd love to hear them. But we want to make sure that carries on bleeding into other tools. We see people who build a great Python library over the years. So Will Sutton, I'll give a little hat tip to him for the Python library he's built up around that. Kelly Gilbert with her Ultrix work. There's great people who are using their tools to go and answer these challenges as well in their own way. That's creating a conversation and a bit more of a community around data preparation. And I'd love to see that grow and foster. If there are other ideas out there, let's hear them. Yeah, would love to see more of that. So I'd like to actively be part of that, but again, caveating with 11-week-old child, you know what some of these early months are like, Sophie. They're fun to try and have these ideas and then try and execute some of them as we go through. But yeah, that's kind of where my head still lies. That there's basically a lot of space for everybody to go after here. That I think hearing different perspectives from across the world, from different cultures, is a really important part of this, because it's going to help us all think about things differently and work that through. But then just kind of seeing what we can do to kind of foster this community and kind of data world where it becomes this friendlier place where everybody feels a bit more comfortable getting involved.
Sounds really, really interesting. You also mentioned quite a few people in the last sort of answer or two. So I just want to let everybody know who's watching that I'll link them all in the comments and description below. So you'll be able to find all those resources and people and books that you've mentioned coming up. And you've mentioned once or twice, Carl, so we're both parents of young children. So my son's a little bit older than Carl's, but yeah, we're both still in that slightly shell-shocked parent stage. So yeah,
so that's back into the eyes. But yeah, and also thinking about, obviously, whenever you become a parent, how do you teach your kids about this stuff? So is there a kids book around data visualization to be written? I know there is. I'm trying to think. Stephanie, I can't remember her surname off the top of my head, the author in London who wrote a book or somebody else about the universe, and there's visual.
Stephanie Posovic and Miriam Quick wrote
Yes.
This is a book, which is a data book which doesn't actually involve any numbers.
Which is amazing.
Yeah.
And I saw that was nominated for awards last night, actually. I think I saw on Twitter that is. So it's that kind of thing of, is there more space to play for that, either, let's say technically for very young people, just to kind of start actually having this communication or conversation earlier, because I still don't see it really being covered in lots of academic education, and it feels like it desperately needs to. As I don't see any job and everyday life where it doesn't involve data and numbers and charts these days. So is there something there? So maybe that's our collaboration, Sophie. Once our little ones get a little bit older, we can go and write a data book for the minions.
I would love that, Carl. And let's wrap this up here. And so, Carl, thank you so much for joining us. And everyone, I hope you do go out and immediately buy Carl's new book, Communicating with Data. It is available across the world right now, so you should be able to find it. There we go. And I'll link to, there we go. So another O'Reilly book, and you can find it in any good book suppliers. So just as we leave, can you give our people watching 2 to 3 key things that they can start doing right now to help them become better data communicators?
Number one, think about your audience. So get to know your audience is a big part of it. I've always advocated sitting on someone's shoulder if possible. So see them work, see them kind of use what you're going to go and produce, and you'll find out miraculous things that you often would overcomplicate something because you're just not sure what they do. So understanding your audience is a huge thing. Secondly, where to go next? I think go past the charts. Think about what else fits around those charts. I think we focus on the charts so much to go and actually understand what's there to show the message, where actually there's lots of other ways that we can show the message supporting that chart, whether that is annotations, titles, reference lines, etc. And the third bit is thinking about that question. So kind of going back to that analytical point of very few people ask the right question first time. And that's because they don't know what the art of the possible is, or that they just don't really know what they need to get to. So, hey, tell me my total sales figures. Probably isn't the question that they really want to get to. Help them get to that question. There's the 5 whys. There's lots of techniques out there of basically channel your kind of belligerent toddler inside you of just like, why, just kind of scratching the surface. So yeah, if you can get down to that real question of what do they really want to know, it's more fun for you to work on if you are working with that data set. But it also means that we learn stuff faster and can move the subjects on with whatever we're covering. So yeah, they were going to be my 3.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And thank you for talking to me today. And I hope you get a little bit of sleep coming up.
Me too. Thanks, Sophie.
Okay. Thank you. And thank everyone who's joined us as well. Okay. Bye, Carl.
Thank you.